welcome. We're glad you can make it. This is Faith and Impact Investing. How you can align your faith and your money. And we have a panel today with Frank Coleman, Amanda Joseph, Wes Lyons, and Robyn Polansky Morrison. I'm Phil Cubeta. I'm the Wallace Chair in Philanthropy at the American College, and we're very glad to have you with us. So let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Frank Coleman, who's founder and CEO of Being Frank Consulting. He's got more than 32 years of experience in our SRI ESG industry with a focus on serving Catholic institutional investors at Christian Brothers Investment Services. Frank has developed a comprehensive knowledge of the needs of the industry and is a nationally recognized expert in the integration of ESG principles in Catholic social teaching. During his tenure at CBIS, Mr. Coleman has had a number of leadership positions for the firm, covering most of the main business lines of the firm. As part of his role, he's a primary CBIS contact in his work with a wide array of industry and Catholic organizations. He's also responsible for expanding CBIS's corporate engagement program and connecting it with a broader national, international community. We're very grateful he's here. Wes Lyons is a leader in faith-based investing in both the public and private markets. He's the co-founder and general partner of two private equity funds, where he has made more than 40 investments across a variety of investment classes. Wes developed faith-based portfolios for Hopkins Investment Management, an SEC registered investment advisor. And prior to his career in investing, he was a naval flight officer on the P-3 Orion, where he was a decorated mission commander in the Middle East and Western Pacific. He has a degree in mechanical engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy. He and his wife, Christy, have 4 sons and are based in Dallas. Thank you, Wes, for being here. We have Robyn Polansky Morrison, who's the founder and lead principal of MORR Strategy, focused on financial literacy, impact and values-based investing, intentional philanthropy, and capital introduction. As a passionate advocate of mission-driven causes, she's engaged in numerous philanthropic activities, serving on several boards and committees in various capacities, including the co-head of impact investing at UGA Federation of New York. She's currently launching a national women's educational program at the intersection of investing with impact and faith-based values. Thank you, Robyn, for being with us. And Amanda Joseph is director of faith-based initiatives at Calvert Impact Capital, serving as a resource for faith-based investors on their impact investing journeys. She partners with faith leaders and networks to build a capacity and community of practicing faith-based impact investors. Prior to joining Calvert Impact Investment Capital, Amanda worked at Opportunity Finance Network, the nation's leading association of community development financial institutions, CDFIs, committed to providing affordable, responsible capital and financial services to communities not served by mainstream finance. And thank you, Amanda, for being with us. So we're going to kick it off with Amanda giving us a basic grounding in what we mean by impact investing. Some know a lot about it, some may not know as much. And I'll turn it over to Amanda, who can cover the basics here for us.
Thank you, Phil, and wonderful to be with everyone this afternoon. So as Phil said, I know there are some amongst you who know what impact investing is and others who don't. So we're going to run through some basic definitions to ground us in today's exciting conversation with our panelists. Impact investments are investments that are made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. These investments can be made both in emerging and developed markets, domestically in the United States, globally as well, with a range of returns from below market or concessionary rates to market rate returns, depending on an investor's strategic goals. The exciting piece of impact investing and motivation is that the impact investments give us an opportunity to address and find solutions to some of the world's most critical challenges, such as environmental sustainability, renewable energy, microfinance, affordable housing, and access to basic services like housing, healthcare, and education. So if anyone's done any research into what is impact investing, you may have found many of these impact investing spectra or spectrums. We like this one, and I'll tell you why. it gives sort of a wonderful overview of where impact investing fits into the wide spectrum of capital that begins with traditional investments on the left and ends with philanthropy on the right. And I know these are spaces in which you are all working, and also in between as well. And I just want to let people know that, as Phil mentioned, we do have a resource guide that we'll be sending out after the webcast, and you'll have an image of this slide. I know it's sort of hard to read. So probably most of us are operating all on the far left over here, the traditional investments part of the spectrum, where we're really looking at financial return only. But as we move across the spectrum, we move into the world of responsible investing, socially responsible investing, sustainable investing. There are a lot of names out there, and impact investments is a piece of this. So a first step for many investors is negative screening, where you decide that there are investments in companies, businesses, and opportunities that you don't want to have in your portfolio based on your faith values, your values overall. For some folks, this could include tobacco or alcohol, pornography, gambling, fossil fuels, weapons, you name it. There's a negative screen if it fits your particular value set. So those are leaving out certain investments. Then we move into what's called ESG integration, and this is a huge and growing part of the market. This, for those who don't know, this is environmental, social, and governance factors that are taken into account when you decide where you'll be investing your funds. These factors include climate resilience, sustainability, labor practices, human rights issues, gender equity, racial equity, diversity in businesses, transparency and corporate accountability. The list is long and actually very important. Actually an important data point. This world of ESG integration is growing very rapidly. The US CIF, which is a great resource for all of you, in its 2020 trends report, found that investors who are considering ESG factors in their investing includes $17 trillion of professionally managed assets, which is a 42% increase from when the survey was done 2 years ago. So this is a growing market. And then finally move into what we're calling impact investing. These are investments that can give a range of returns across asset classes, but again, really focusing on the social and environmental return and measurable impact. That market, sized by the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, is at approximately $715 billion in the most recent survey, and you'll have a link to that as well. And then finally, at the very end, we have philanthropy, which is impact only. We're not expecting a return on our investments, except in terms of real impact in the communities in which we're making our contributions. And maybe the final point here is that with philanthropy, an individual or institutional's investors' priorities and goals with their philanthropy may sometimes be contradicted by where their investments are being held and what their portfolio looks like. And that's what this conversation is about. And finally, the last slide, and then I'll move on to the questions. Key characteristics of impact investing: intentionality, that the investor has an intention to have a positive social and environmental impact with their portfolio, that we expect returns. We expect to generate a financial return, as well as a return of capital across a return spectrum, that these investments are available in a range of asset classes, including cash equivalents, fixed income, venture capital, public and private equity, and that impact is measured and reported. And just at the bottom, for those of you on the screen, it's allowing this woman to have solar panels put on her home in Washington, D.C., or an affordable childcare center in New Hampshire, or solar lighting instead of kerosene lamps in Africa, or a small business person here in the States who's an immigrant who can have a business and employ other people. That's what really drives a lot of what we do with impact investing.
Fabulous. All right, we're going to move on to the panel presentation here. And the first question is, how does each panelist connect money and impact for clients of faith? And that's intentionally open-ended. Maybe start with you, Robyn.
Thank you so much, Phil. I'm incredibly humbled to have been invited to join this conversation this afternoon. I'm relatively new to the conversation of impact investing at the intersection of faith. And my quick answer to this question is it depends on the client, right? But that's not a sufficient answer, because we're all here to learn how to start that conversation, how to create a rich experience for our clients, but it is true. And so for me, I stumbled into this conversation about faith and impact and connecting money and impact and faith and all of these things through my work, through literacy, through strategy, through having conversations with my clients, right? So money, values, investing, impact, gender, faith, these are not easy topics to discuss. So it seems pretty logical to put a few of them together and try and encourage our clients to action with it. But there's all sorts of cultural assumptions, right? And obstacles to action. And so in my work, what we try and do is begin with the education, begin with the conversation, and have that reframing of what investing is. It often takes a while for clients to actually connect their faith to money, but it's all about the dialogue. It's all about allowing the space, shifting the conversation. One of the things that my clients and those around me will often hear is that the business of money, the business of investing, is no longer just about the brain. It's about the brain and the heart, right? Just as philanthropy is now sort of no longer just about the heart, there's a whole new aspect of philanthropy that includes the brain. And so when Amanda was introducing this spectrum of investing, right, over here you've got sort of catalytic philanthropy, where you're not expecting a market return, but you're certainly expecting impact, all the way to, you know, the investing side where you're expecting both a market impact. And there's all this opportunity in between. This is all the opportunity to help our clients connect money and impact and use their faith to identify the areas that are important to them, the areas where they want to move the needle, whether it's $100, $1,000, $1 million, and more. And so it's really reframing the conversation and trying to get rid of some of these cultural assumptions and expectations, whatever your culture, whatever your faith is, right? It's bringing that conversation down. And candidly, it's bringing a lot of different people to the table in a different way.
Well, thank you, Robyn. You know, Wes, how about you and your work with clients? How do you connect their faith with their money?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate being on this panel here today. There are several facets to the way that I get to express my faith in my work, and they all are my personal mission statement is walking with investors and entrepreneurs that are bringing light to dark places, kind of similar to the work that I got to do previously, where I'd be on teams in the military trying to move the dial against ISIS or some other dark thing on earth. Applying that here in the financial sphere. And I express that through, I get to be part of a Christ-centered real estate fund where we're working in multifamily communities. I get to be part of an impact venture fund where we're backing entrepreneurs that are solving really big problems like malaria or modern day slavery or corruption in scalable technology applications. And the third is just there's a subset of advisors that really are good at this already. And as I spent a number of years directly advising clients, so many people would come and ask, who's good at this? How do I do it? And so we just created the platform, faithbasedinvesting.co, to help. There's a lot of people looking to express their values to find the advisors that are really good at it. So in every asset class and section, trying to create easy buttons for people that want to express their values through investments.
Great. You know, Frank, I think your context may be slightly different. You're working more with institutional investors, is that right? And endowed funds and things like that. How do you talk to them about connecting the faith with the money as opposed to just portfolios?
Well, let me do one thing ahead of time, and in case some former colleagues or current colleagues are on the call, I do have to be clear that I have retired from CBIS, so I'm no longer actively involved, which is why you heard at the beginning of the being frank part. So just so everyone's clear about that, I really view what I was doing as telling stories to try to connect what we were doing for our clients with the direct impact of the results of that. And there are really three stories to tell. The first is the financial performance, the risk return. This is what the portfolio did. This is what this particular company in the portfolio did. These are the reasons why. These are the economic, environmental reasons why it performed the way that it did, which is pretty much the traditional performance reporting sort of paradigm that I think everyone who's invested is used to. But the second thing that we tried to do, and this was a very deliberate attempt because there is still this underlying suspicion that in order to do this properly, you have to take less of a return. So one of the other stories that we told was what we called an attribution story. We would connect the performance of the various companies with attribution as a way of demonstrating that even though we were making decisions around impact, those decisions around impact or ESG were not materially affecting that first story as it relates to the risk return and performance. And then the third story was the impact story. Lives on the ground that were being affected by the decisions that we were making in the portfolio. It went from individual stories, and you saw some of the slides that Amanda put up. They were granular in that way, this person, solar on the house, to much more, to bigger stories, as in the movement to impact corporate America and the way that they looked at the way that they ran their business. So we try to divide it into three ways so that it could hit on all sides of the brain of the investor. The financial brain, the brain about measuring the metrics of performance, as well as the story of connecting to the human side. And I think we did that quite successfully.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And how about you, Amanda, in the work you're doing? What do you have tips on how to connect faith and money through this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And maybe picking up on Frank, it's the stories that are so powerful. So just a few, I think we touched on it a little bit, but this world of impact that we now call impact investing was really led by faith investors, were the pioneers in what we now call impact investing today. So there are a lot of really important stories to tell about people's denominations, people's faith communities who've been doing this work for many decades. And that to me is always very powerful. I love telling the stories of the sisters, the Catholic orders, the women religious, who are really at the forefront of so much of the United States community development investing, work I've been involved in for many years with their retirement funds, who really help build the market and create a field for others to follow, other faith communities as well who joined with them, but then just regular folk. So I think that's an important piece of it. I just want to share a couple of quick facts. I work at Calvert Impact Capital. We're a nonprofit investment firm that does this investing. My role is to build the space among faith investors and partner with others. But we do an investor survey every year. So in our last investor survey, we found that 44% of all investors and 72% of millennial investors are more likely to invest now in impact investing since the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's a powerful piece to throw in there, not particularly faith related, but it's driving a lot of us, people really to look at their values again. We also found that 26% of those surveyed said that they invest in impact because of their faith. And again, in our portfolio, which has grown tremendously over the past 25 years, about 20% of our investors are faith community investors. So it's really a part of what we do every day.
Fantastic. Thank you. When we think about doing this kind of work, are there barriers or common questions or even objections, misconceptions that kind of hold people back that you have to overcome to make progress? And maybe I could start with Wes on that. Do you find that there are barriers you have to overcome to get to yes?
Absolutely. And I think just like Robyn and Frank and Amanda were talking about, this shift from the mental brain and the emotional brain is really significant. And I've found that if I lead with the emotional side, it's hard for people to engage. So because they still have these questions running in the back of their head of, what about performance? Can I trust this? Is this really credible? What am I giving up? There's no such thing as a free lunch. And I've really struggled when I've shared new ideas, new investments, or new new strategies with people, kind of leading with the feel good because they know I'm talking about their investment portfolio, and it's kind of just running in the back of their mind. What are you asking me to give up here? Where on the flip side, I really learned this with an amazing investment that was one of the most measurable impacts that I had ever seen. It was about $2,000 per life transformed of women that were going to be not in trafficking. Absolutely extraordinary what they were doing. And I went through a number trying to lead with this amazing story and was getting all this pushback because I was leading with the heart. And then I flipped it over because it was actually a compelling investment where it was, and I won't go into the details, but I just led with the compelling investment and kind of got them excited with their brain and then said, oh, well, let me add to that the story of this great investment. Here's how it has an impact. And it was revolutionary. I was just getting, everybody would say yes at that point, where I was getting very spotty success prior. And it's done really well. But it was a big lesson that I couldn't lead with the heart when I was coming out of, there's goals for this money. These aren't the mass wealthy where they can lose $1 billion or something like that. Most people have specific goals. So that's been the biggest lesson learned, is trying to start with the mind and move to the heart. I loved how you talked about that, Robyn.
Beautiful. And how about you, Robyn? Are there things that you find commonly there's a misconception or a barrier or an objection as you get started with your process?
So I've had experiences all over the map so far. When we think about faith, when we think about religion, they're really compasses, right? They're really strategies, and to everybody else's point, they're stories. And stories are always changing, right? Different beliefs, things happen that change beliefs, and it's really hard with the conversation changing. So I'd say one of the biggest challenges is to help people realize that impact investing is such a personal journey. And to Wes's point, right, there is still the thought behind building a portfolio and this being part of an investment plan overall. What's the performance? How am I doing? What's my return? Am I going to reach my goals? All of these questions that are still super relevant. And then you layer over the impact piece, right? And that becomes complicated when you start to think about the real impacts. So impact measurement, just like it is in every other corner of impact investing, is a huge challenge, right? And then you bring faith into it, and it's like, how do you measure the faithful impact, or what is the outcome, or what are you desiring to have the impact, right? If an environment is super critical to me, one investment might make sense to one client and not to the other because it has less, maybe they're cutting down or they're planting more trees than others. So the impact measurement and really getting people comfortable with it ends up being a personal journey. And that also speaks to something that Wes was saying about sort of finding opportunities to connect with their clients, right? And not every investment is going to be like labeled an impact investment, but at the end of the day, if you can find the impact, if you can find the story, if it speaks to you, in addition to the investment. So impact measurement, sort of the way that it's sort of categorized, the religious piece changing a little bit. And I'd say the last common barrier that I've had to overcome, and part of the focus of my work, is literacy. Impact investing and all of the different derivations is complicated, right? Investing itself, as I said at the start of our conversation, is complicated. And for many clients, if there is not a basic understanding of even the difference between a stock and a bond, or inflation, or compound interest, then you put all of these incredibly tough concepts and things that are not quite so, straightforward, right? All of the metrics and all of the, the heart and the brain part on top of the brain piece, the investing piece, it gets really complicated. But once we get through to clients, then I find it clear sailing most of the time, right? So once you gain that trust, which is another one of those hurdles. So I think those are the biggest for me.
That's very helpful. Thanks. And how about you, Amanda? When you're sitting down with somebody trying to position the conversation, do you find that there are common misconceptions they have?
Well, it's interesting. In the work that I do, we're really working with financial professionals and also with institutional faith investors. And I'll share on the institutional side, because some of you may have clients like that. We sometimes find that it's the client who needs to convince their financial professionals, their advisors, their managers, that this is a space they want, that they actually want to investigate and invest in. So we see that there are some barriers on the advisor, financial planners, financial managers, institutional consultants who really need to understand that this is, a legitimate and growing industry.
Yeah.
So we're developing some resources to help with that. And then I think on the flip side, we're also working with advisors, which is why this is such a wonderful opportunity for us to discover what do you need to be able to have that conversation with your clients. And again, there's so much wonderful data, stories, and some basic documentation that we can offer, because it's so important that you all have the tools you need to have these conversations with your clients.
That's great. Now, Frank, do you find that there are particular barriers or misunderstandings or challenges at the institutional level where people are managing large amounts of money and you're trying to get them to think in these terms?
Yes, and it's exactly what everyone else has said. One would think that we ascribe to the institutional level a higher level of sophistication and awareness, and my experience is that's not necessarily the case. Financial literacy, you might have people that understand the basics, but you also have a lot of people who think they know everything and they have very little experience actually managing portfolios. They might be a business person or someone who works in construction, has had a very successful business, but has never really looked at how do I evaluate a stock? How do I evaluate that stock in relation to other stocks in a portfolio? So I wouldn't say automatically that what you experience at the retail level is substantially different than what you experience on the institutional level. It might be slightly different, but not, you do experience, at least I've experienced financial illiteracy at that level. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that two of the things I'd quickly comment on is, I think the steps in connecting the barriers are essentially the same that you would do on the investing side. Know your investor. That's a paramount responsibility of the fiduciary. Understand what they're looking for, trying to achieve. That's the same whether it's financial performance or whether it's financial performance and impact. And the last thing I'll say is use the KISS method. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Don't overcomplicate. Clients may want to do everything at one time because that's just the impulse of clients, whether retail or institutional. What we have to try to do is bring them along the journey in a measured way that's right for them. Some can jump right in, others will have to be brought in step by step by step. And that goes along with the first point of just knowing who your clients are. But I can't stress enough, it's really keep it simple and wean them into the process rather than expecting that you're going to be a perfect portfolio in the first year.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Yeah, the next question is really kind of about positioning your practice and marketing this kind of a service. And given the variety of faith traditions and the fact the advisor may share a faith tradition or not share a faith tradition with a particular client, do you see this as a way of building a practice around your own personal faith? In other words, just like a filter you apply on the front end so that you're dealing with people of a similar value system, a similar tradition that you can then work within? Or is this something an advisor could specialize in working with a variety of faith traditions and get good at that conversation across traditions? What are you seeing? Maybe I'll start with Frank again to kind of carry it on. I mean, you work primarily with Catholic institutions, right?
Correct. Yes, and we've tried a number of collaborations with lots of other denominations. And I would say, as I think about it and have thought about it, I'd go back to that investing timeline. I think along that timeline, there are probably places where collaboration is possible. That is, where it's possible for a advisor of a particular faith to work with other faith investors. I think there's certain universal elements that we all believe in if we're people of faith. If you focus around those, then I think it's going to work, especially on the retail side. Once you get to the institutional side, I have found that there could be certain barriers in terms of, especially in the public equity side. Maybe not so on the community economic development, maybe not so much on the private equity side, but clearly on the public equity side, there is going to be, our experience is, and let me just give a quick example. We tried to establish, working with Stocks, which is a index provider in Europe, a Christian index in Europe, based in Switzerland. And we had an independent committee that was actually making decisions about, working with the analysts to make decisions about stocks in the company, in the portfolio rather. And when you got Catholics, Protestants, Episcopalians in the same room trying to make decisions about stocks across a range of issues, it was not easy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but those same groups, we were able to talk outside of this particular context about community economic development initiatives where we all bought into that precept. So I really think it's not a yes or no. I really think it's who are you trying to meet, and if you're doing it at a level where there seems to be common agreement with other investors that share principles, that are faith principles that you understand, then I think it can work really well.
Interesting. Thank you. And Robyn, you work primarily with Jewish women or the Jewish community, and do you find that's like a bonding agent that helps you have rapport so that you can communicate better, and it's easier to work within that bonded group as opposed to across other faith traditions? Or how do you think of that?
Yes, 100%. Go where you know. But candidly, I haven't gone anywhere else yet. So it's hard to say with certainty that that bond wouldn't form as I'm learning other religions and faiths too, right? And everything, I agree with you, Frank, and everything you just said about sort of the timelines and the experiences. For me, the program that I'm building right now is looking at impact investing at the intersection of Judaism and women. We're building the program though, so we'll say Jewish values, but we're really looking at values that are, to Frank's point, universal, right? Trust and safety, repairing the world, education. These are values that I think are cross-dimensional in every way, shape, or form. In our program right now, we're learning them using Jewish scripture, using Jewish story. We've got some incredible rabbis that are working with us to help us put that into context. And then the hope and the idea is that somebody else, or maybe me at some point, or my partner, or whomever, can take the program that we've built and then slot in any other denomination, religion, group, specialty group, because you're right, Phil, there is a bonding agent to having just one more factor that we're all comfortable with around the table. But also intra-religion, it's been fascinating to get people to the table within Judaism that might not come together in a natural way or in a non-contentious way, and have a conversation around investing, around something else, and then get to the bigger issues, religiously speaking. So there are so many dimensions to it. So again, for me, it's going where I know, but I don't want to be so one-sided that what we're creating isn't leverageable for any other denomination or religion.
This is very helpful. How about you, Wes? You work with primarily Christians. I mean, is that do you think of that as a marketing strategy as well as a mission-based strategy?
It depends on the investment vehicle. So my experience has been, like, for instance, on the WayMaker real estate fund, the impact is almost exclusively share the love of Jesus with people. So that's obviously just going to primarily attract between either people that are looking for return or that type of impact. But on the venture impact investing, my experience has been that across the faith spectrum, people like Frank was sharing, when you're doing community development, I've had clients that have zero agreement on faith values break into tears because they're so excited about what they're seeing in addressing malaria or modern day slavery. A lot of people can get excited about, hey, there's 46 million slaves in the world. Let's turn that down. I mean, there's very few people that won't get excited about that. But specifically, I believe that you can build practices around the faith alignment. That's what faith-based investing.co is leveraging, of like Deloitte and many others have come out with. Across the faith spectrum, something like 70% of people are interested in having conversation with their advisors about expressing values through investments. And as you move to millennials, in line with what you were sharing earlier, Amanda, it's something on the order of 90% were already interested pre-COVID in having a conversation, and apparently it just went up 77%. I'm not sure how that math works, but millennials are very interested. So that platform just leads to the advisors that are doing it well, partially just because we want to catch as many advisors' attention as possible that this is real. Amanda, you talked about the difference between, there's actually clients having to try to convince their advisors to take a look at this right now. And there's quite a bit of data right now that there's a mismatch between demand and advisors doing this. And it'll be really exciting because like Frank was talking about, there's just there's an expertise that's required to be, sorry, Robyn, you were sharing it. Like, it's complex, like trying to take in for most people all the complexity of the financial world and all the complexity of how to change a nation or how to change poverty it's difficult. So most people need to find somebody they can trust and press the button and say, let's go on this, not read 100 books and get a PhD on it. So.
No, that's very helpful. You don't want the bearers. Maybe there aren't enough advisors who are good at this. Yeah. How about you, Amanda? You work across traditions, right? At Calvert.
Yeah. So I'll speak a little bit about that, about sort of the multi-faith, interfaith opportunities that are there, and some examples. And just to echo what everyone else has said, I mean, these, for the most part, these are truly universal values and secular values. But if you're a member of a faith community, you can find, volumes of scripture and text and tradition and practices that can really help ground you in impact investing. So I just want to say, there's a lot of exciting personal work you can do around this, but just research. And I think if you're values driven, you will find a way to those clients. On an institutional level, just a few examples. I had been part of a fund that had started right after Katrina. It was an interfaith disaster response fund that a number of faiths participated: Jewish, Mennonite, Catholic, American Baptist. That was a very powerful tool in the South, in the Delta, and then also around Sandy recovery. And that was a wonderful coming together of multi-faith institutional impact investors. I know of several funds out there that are faith-defined, but also attract other people, people of other faiths and secular investors, because of this sort of universal value piece. A Mennonite mutual fund, a Quaker investment fund, a Jewish community foundation donor advised fund. These all have particular faiths, in the headline. But I know that they all also attract investors just because of this universality here. There's also a great organization. This will be on the resource sheet, called Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. Frank has been a real leader in that space for decades. This group works in shareholder advocacy as well as other pieces along impact investing spectrum. But that's an amazing group of dozens of organizations across faiths who come together around shared values to take real action and investment in this space. Finally, I'm part of a hub of faith investors, asset managers, and sort of networks who are trying to grow the space. That's organized by the Global Impact Investing Network. So, there's a lot of activity around here about working across faiths that, while you may be dealing with individual clients, can draw upon as examples where we've been successful.
This is great. You know, I've noticed we've got some very good questions coming in. So when we do have time to kind of reflect on them, I think we've really touched a nerve. These are excellent questions. Here's one. I'd like to do this, you know, concentrate on philanthropy as a niche. Okay, but first of all, I don't quite know how to do it. So that's partly coming to things like this and doing the research. But here's the question part. I've been told by some it's a tough niche because religion is a political hot button these days. That it can be, in a sense, polarizing or it can be off-putting. Have you had that experience where you're cast in a certain light and people prejudge you? So let me start with Wes. I mean, do you ever get that, a sense that, you know, if you're identified with a Christian organization, people make a ton of assumptions?
I think the key is we have a couple decades of history where this was primarily defined by what we don't invest in. And I've been trying to really reframe the conversation to the extent that I have a small voice to really talk about just this is a better way to invest and what we're trying to positively do. So if your voice is primarily talking about serving the poor, solving malaria, trying to make a positive impact, it's much harder to fight that than if your voice is primarily, we have to get this out, we have to get that out. There's some things we can all agree on, like, hey, if there's a tobacco company and they're just preying on children all over Asia, let's just get it out of the portfolio, and not many people are going to fight you on it, you know. But I love the idea of talking about it as a dual mandate that really is going to be what advisors are expected to do in a few years, holding risk-adjusted returns and the total portfolio impact intention in doing that skillfully. And that starts to tampen down the conversations about clean or not clean, and which is not very useful, and talk about, okay, I'm going to line my portfolio up against yours and let's see who has more impact. That's actually kind of a constructive conversation. Just see, let's try to outdo each other in love for one another in kind of a more religious language, you know. Mm-hmm. It turns into a constructive conversation and changes it from something that is more about what we don't do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to make sure we can kind of weave together some of these questions, and maybe we can respond to more than one at the same time, because I think there's some themes here. This is asking about, I'm going to reframe the question a little bit, but let's say you have people who primarily think in terms of philanthropy, activism, social change. They really don't think much in terms of Wall Street, business solutions to social ills. Do you find that there's a kind of a communication gap between you all as investment professionals who also double in the faith world? You're bilingual, let me put it that way, in communicating with people who only have the one language and have almost a bias against business solutions. So I'll read the question now in that context. How do you respond to the activist community for whom incremental change is a sellout and nothing short of whatever they define as purity is acceptable? Have you run across that kind of viewpoint that you're actually compromising with mammon? You call yourself religion, you're really compromising with mammon. You know, Frank, do you ever get something like that?
Yeah, all the time, but I fly my religious flag proudly. So I'm not apologetic about it. I'm proud of it. And I do think there's a role. I always like to think there's a role for each of us in trying to change the world. I think there's a role for activists to try to change the world. We may not be able to work on exactly the same things at exactly the same time, but there might be things where it will cross over, and they would not probably come to me to manage their money. But I do think that I accept the fact that they are part of this solution space, as all of us are. So I think I wouldn't get too upset about all of those conversations. It goes to, I think what Robyn was saying is, go where you know. If you do that, then you're going to connect with those people you have an affinity to work with, and you'll respect the work that others are doing that may not be within that affinity space.
Okay, well, thanks. I'm going to get another question here, and I think there's been a number of people who've been kind of asking versions of the same question. Because
I think Amanda might want to.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, so okay, just to jump in on that one. I mean, it's a really interesting question. You know, what I would offer is most of us, whatever our means, have some money wrapped up in banking and in capital markets, whether it be our retirement funds. And that's where you can continue that conversation with an activist. Where is my organization's, how are my organization's funds being managed? Have we thought about that simple or complex portfolio, and is impact reflected there?
Mm-hmm.
Where am I doing my own personal banking?
Mm-hmm.
Is it in a community development bank or a Black-led financial institution? Or is it in a community development credit union? And there's been just a huge explosion of resources out there. Some of that's in the resource page that we're going to send you, about just thinking about your banking choices. So there are, I guess, maybe just to go back to what Frank was saying about KISS, keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
These incremental steps towards impact investing can happen quite easily, and you don't have to start with, I think, let's say, reframing your entire portfolio from day one. But taking these steps, and that might be a question back to the activist crew.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So you're already in the market, whether you realize it or not, because of a pension fund, and you're already touching it. So exactly. Okay. So here's a question I see a lot of people asking in different versions. If you're new to this as an advisor, okay, you know how to manage money, you know how to select investments, but you're really not proficient yet in the faith conversation. Do you have an opening gambit or a line? How do you test their willingness even to have the conversation? Open the door to this. Robyn, I see your lips moving there.
This is a tough question, because I think, at least for me and where I am now, it's so known what I'm doing that if you start a conversation with me, it's going to go there. Right. So, and it's really about, getting the client to talk about what they're really trying to accomplish, right, at the end of the day. So it's not just the typical risk reward, how old are you, what are your goals? It's what's your definition of success? What does it mean to have enough, and what are you going to do with your quote unquote more than enough? Right. And I did have one additional thought on the prior question, which could also kind of relate to this question, which is, there are a lot of numbers out there about how much it's going to cost to fix some of the world's greatest challenges, right? If we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it's 7 trillion, 8 trillion, 9 trillion. Again, there's lots of different studies. It's a big number, right? And if we look at philanthropy alone in the US, it's a couple $100 billion a year, right? And so there is an obvious gap, right, between billions and trillions if we want to start accomplishing and working towards justice on issues, whether it's food insecurity, water, or gender, whatever it is, right? And so that gap is going to come from the capital markets, which are 30, 40 trillion. Again, depends on which study you're choosing, right? But that gap is where we can start the conversation and help those who are sort of stuck firmly in that philanthropic mind that I just got to give, right? Which is important too. That has an absolute role in a portfolio. But remember what I said at the onset of the conversation, which is there is sort of this meshing of the heart and mind, but there's also sort of no longer the bifurcation between just the philanthropy bucket and just the investing bucket. And it's obvious when you look at those numbers and say, okay, how are we going to work at the world's largest problems if we don't start using capital markets and philanthropy? And I think we can compel some of those folks who are so stuck in philanthropy to move a little bit to here, to be a little bit more thoughtful in their investments. And even those investors who don't have much to do with philanthropy, move them this way. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as we're all doing this work. And if you're new in the area, also look at those numbers. There's a lot of room there.
No, that's very helpful. That's extremely thoughtful. This is an interesting question. This is from somebody, I think, who's been doing some of this. And they actually do debrief clients about what success looks like and how they want to make the world better kind of early in the process in the discovery agreement. And what they're asking is really the customized portfolio side of this. So let's say you get something pretty specific, like sex trafficking or whatever it might be. How do you then connect in a meaningful way something that's a rifle shot objective with a portfolio that fits, and who has that expertise, and what should the advisor do? When we throw that open to the panel, how would you guide because I mean, they're packaged investment products, but he seems to be asking, how do you get more targeted than that if the client does have a fair amount of money and has a specific objective?
The answer depends on the specific cause, Phil. And that's actually where we bring a ton of value as advisors as we're looking at resources. Like there's going to be a whole resource list that comes out after this. Just being aware of all the investment products, what the managers are, what their passions are, so that you can hear something like, oh, sex trafficking. I know the guys who are good at that, and start being able to help people really express their values through investments. So I think that's where advisors can really differentiate themselves, and in some cases become experts on certain issues. And it's a fun way to get talked about, because people start talking about you at the local barbecue when you're solving a big problem that touches their heart.
Excellent. Here's another one. So there's so much money now in foundations, but also in donor advised funds. If an advisor is working with a client who already has a pool of philanthropic resources, let's say it's from a donor advised fund or could be a foundation, have you had luck prospecting into that money and providing a service to it?
I can just quickly speak to a couple of examples. Others may have more to say here, but increasingly donor advised funds are looking at impact investing opportunities. I know that the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego, which is a donor advised fund, offers impact investing opportunities for their DAFs. There's a really interesting program going on with a Jewish Community Foundation up in San Francisco. There's a group out of Virginia that works nationally called Locus Impact Investing that works with community foundations, which includes, of course, people of faith who have DAFs there, to really do this sort of very localized community investment. So it's 15 years ago, I had worked with a community foundation to get them to allow DAF investments in this space. So it's increasingly becoming accessible, and there's clearly conversations that still have to happen to make it all the more accessible. And if others have experience with DAFs and how that's worked.
Here's another question. Can you provide some examples of specific faith-based investments within your tradition or whatever group you're working with that are not managed or packaged funds, that are more customized, and how you measure return? And I assume that means both social return and financial return. What are you providing on the back end? Is it a mutual fund? Is it a managed pool of money that has a generic set of objectives and you match that to the generic investor's objectives? Or are you constructing a specific portfolio specifically for them? And how do you measure the return of the impact on society in a portfolio like that? Do you pick specific investments for them personally, not just funds?
I think it depends on the advisor. I know in my case, when we have a fund, it's a pooled vehicle, and it's either going after Christ-centered transformation in real estate, or it's going after tech-enabled social transformation in malaria and slavery and issues like that. Some advisors are picking individual portfolios, and you can find some that will go into the private markets doing angel investing, that sort of thing. But it's a very short list of people who should be, even with an advisor's help, doing angel investing on their own. But certainly with an advisor is much better than without one.
I think the popularity of sort of impact and the momentum that it's currently facing right now, you're going to see more fund work than you're going to see in individual work. And that is, I think, purely a function of scalability at this present moment. I mean, it's probably all of our hopes on this panel that, in a few years from now, there really isn't going to be a differentiation between impact and ESG and doing well and doing good. But for now, we have to keep some of those guardrails on. And so as advisors, to the point made earlier, are starting to get on board for the most part with this, it's a little bit easier to go with funds than it is to go with individual investments, not only for the measurement piece, but even for the candidly saleability and building of a portfolio.
Thank you. And we're kind of reaching the end. The questions are coming in faster than we're answering them, which I think is a very good sign. We've actually triggered people's thinking, and we will get back to all the people who had questions. But I really want to take the opportunity to thank Wes and Robyn and Frank and Amanda for all the work that went into this, and what a great presentation. We're so fortunate that you made your investment in us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck to everybody.
It's really been great being with you. I hope you'll be able to apply it in your practice.